The alien transmission arrived without warning, a pulse of energy rippling through every comm satellite orbiting Earth. At first, technicians thought it was a solar anomaly until the signal stabilized, decoded itself, and spoke. We invite your species to negotiate your terms of submission. Send a single shuttle with your highest representatives to orbit of planet RYX4. Your cooperation will preserve your survival. It was not a threat, not exactly. It was worse. It was an ultimatum dressed in diplomacy. When the message hit the global networks, the world seemed to stop. News feeds replayed the same 10-second clip in every language, analysts and pundits whispering with pale faces. It was the first direct contact Earth had ever received from the Rixon conglomerate, the largest and oldest interstellar empire known to exist. For 30 years, humanity had cautiously observed the galaxy, watching and learning. The Rixons ruled 100 star systems with cold efficiency. Their fleets enforced order with surgical brutality. No species had ever refused their invitation and lived to tell about it. In the White House Situation Room, the atmosphere was thick with fear and quiet defiance. President Abigail Mercer stood at the head of the table, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the projected hologram that hovered above the polished surface, a towering, four-eyed alien figure, its skin like polished obsidian, delivering the same message again and again. Madam President, General Marcus Vance said, breaking the tense silence. The grizzled head of Earth Defense Force leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. We have confirmation from our intelligence partners on Europa Station. This is standard Rixon procedure. They demand surrender once. If refused, they annihilate the target's fleets, cripple its colonies, and force compliance through orbital bombardment. Across from him, Secretary of State Jordan Keller looked as though he hadn't slept in days. General, with respect, we have to consider their offer. The Rixons have a fleet that outnumbers ours at least 1,000 to 1. They could wipe out every ship we own before we could mount a single counterattack. Negotiating may be the only way to. No. The word cut through the air like a knife. All eyes turned to President Mercer. She hadn't moved, but her voice carried a quiet, lethal finality. We will not negotiate the terms of humanity's chains, she said. Not while I sit in this office. Keller hesitated, his voice tight. Madam President, you're talking about a war we can't possibly win. Mercer finally looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Perhaps. But there are worse things than losing a war, Secretary Keller. One of them is losing who we are. The room fell silent. Only the soft hum of the air filtration system could be heard. Then Mercer turned to General Vance. They expect a shuttle, she said. We're not sending a shuttle. Vance's weathered face shifted into the faintest shadow of a grim smile. Then what are we sending? Mercer gestured to the holographic display. The image changed, showing the angular, predatory outline of Earth's most secret weapon, EDF Nemesis. The room seemed to get colder as the silhouette rotated, revealing gun batteries, missile bays, and the elongated barrel of the experimental Ares lance. The Nemesis was built for a day we prayed would never come, Mercer said. That day is here. If the Rixons think humanity will kneel, we will show them exactly what kind of species they are dealing with. The Nemesis moved like a phantom through the void. Its hull, a matte black alloy of human ingenuity and desperation, devoured starlight as if it were born from the darkness itself. It was twice the length of any ship in the Earth Defense Force and armed with weapons whose existence was still officially denied. On the bridge, Captain Elias Ward stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the stars streak past as the destroyer cut through hyperspace. He was tall, lean, with the hard expression of a man who had spent most of his life preparing for a war he hoped would never come. Status report, he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. Commander Riley Chen, his second-in-command, glanced at the data streaming across her console. Her dark eyes reflected the glow of the displays. ETA to RYX4 orbit, 37 minutes. Shields stable, primary weapons charged. All systems are green. Ward gave a curt nod. The crew was silent, focused, but the tension in the air was thick enough to taste. He could feel it pressing against them all, the weight of representing not just the Earth Defense Force, but the entire species. In the communications pit, Lieutenant Harper Mason's console chimed. She turned in her chair, her voice low. "Captain, we've intercepted open-channel Rixin chatter. They've deployed a ceremonial escort for us. They believe we're sending a diplomatic shuttle." A thin, humorless smile tugged at the corner of Ward's mouth. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The transition out of hyperspace was smooth and silent, like stepping through the skin of reality. And then it was their RYX-4. The alien planet was beautiful, almost unnervingly so, a swirling marble of teal oceans and silvery cloud bands wrapped in a faint ring of crystalline debris. It might have inspired wonder had it not been guarded by death. The Rixin fleet hung in orbit like a wall of black glass. Dozens of cruisers and escort ships formed a perfect perimeter around the planet, their hulls gleaming under the light of the distant sun. Their formation was symmetrical, precise, a statement of control, of absolute authority. "They're hailing us," Mason said, her voice taut with tension. "On screen," Ward ordered. The main display came alive with the image of a Rixin High Marshal, tall, statuesque, its skin shimmering like oil on water, its 4 black eyes unblinking. "Human vessel," the alien said, its voice a low, resonant hum. "Your shuttle is larger than expected. Nevertheless, transmit your delegation manifest and prepare for escort. Any hostile action will be met with overwhelming force." Ward stepped forward, his boots echoing softly on the deck. When he spoke, his voice was calm, even, but every word carried the weight of Earth behind it. "This is Captain Elias Ward of the Earth Defense Force destroyer Nemesis. We are not here to negotiate terms of surrender." The Rixin's expression didn't change, but a ripple passed through its 4 eyes, confusion, perhaps even mild amusement. "Then why have you come?" Ward's answer was soft, but it struck like a blade. "To tell you that Earth will never submit." A charged silence followed. On the bridge, the crew sat motionless, as though the entire universe was holding its breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, the Rixin fleet began to shift. Their cruisers adjusted position, closing ranks, the noose tightening around the Nemesis. "Captain," Chen said quietly, her fingers hovering over her console. "They're locking weapons." Ward's expression didn't change. "Then it begins. Arm primary batteries. Target the lead cruiser." Deep within the Nemesis, reactors roared to life. The matte hull began to glow with faint, menacing light as capacitors charged. The Ares Lance, a weapon that bent spacetime itself, spun up for the first time in combat. Earth hadn't come to beg. Earth had come to bare its teeth. The Rixin fleet moved first. On the main display, dozens of green targeting markers lit up around the Nemesis. Then, with perfect synchronicity, the alien ships fired. Space itself lit up. Emerald streaks of plasma fire crossed the void in converging arcs, each one screaming toward the lone human destroyer. The bridge of the Nemesis shuddered as the first volley struck her forward shields, rippling across the hull in a dazzling sphere of blue energy. Forward shields holding 93%. Commander Riley Chen called out, gripping her console as another barrage struck. Captain Elias Ward stood motionless at the center of the bridge, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. Return fire. The Nemesis came alive. Railgun batteries along the dorsal spine spat hypervelocity tungsten slugs at near relativistic speeds. They streaked across the void faster than the human eye could follow, punching through the first cruiser's shields with a thunderous ripple of light. The alien ship twisted in its formation, its energy barriers collapsing under the kinetic onslaught. "Lance ready," shouted Lieutenant Harper Mason from the weapons station. "Fire," Ward ordered. Deep within the Nemesis, the Ares Lance discharged with a soundless flash, a beam of collapsed spacetime tearing a perfect line through the void. The energy strike hit the wounded cruiser dead center, punching a hole straight through its reactor core. For an instant, the ship glowed white-hot, then folded in on itself in a violent implosion. On the main display, the first Rixin ship vanished from existence. "Direct hit," Chen breathed, her voice tight with awe. Ward's jaw tightened. "Target the next one." The alien fleet did not break. If anything, their formation grew tighter, their maneuvers sharper. The loss of a ship didn't frighten them, it focused them. Multiple enemy cruisers broke off and flanked the Nemesis, moving with unnerving coordination. Plasma fire intensified, hammering the human destroyer's shields from all sides. The bridge rocked violently, sparks leaping from overhead conduits. Shields down to 80%. Chen reported. Ward's voice was steady, calm, even as the deck rattled beneath his boots. Helm, evasive pattern Theta 7. Keep us between their firing lines, make them shoot each other if we can. Aye, Captain. The Nemesis rolled hard to port, engines flaring bright blue as she threaded the gap between two converging plasma barrages. Alien fire crisscrossed behind her, catching one of their own frigates in the blast. It spun away, venting atmosphere, before the formation closed again. The crew worked as one, every station a blur of motion. Mason's fingers danced across the weapons controls, coordinating railgun volleys with precision timing. Tactical Officer Lieutenant Diego Ruiz called out firing solutions for the drone bays. Launch hammerheads, Ward ordered. Beneath the destroyer's hull, hatches irised open, and a swarm of dagger-shaped drones streaked out into the void. They darted between enemy cruisers like metallic hornets, evading defensive fire before embedding themselves in critical weak points. One by one, they detonated in synchronized microsingularity bursts. 3 Rixen cruisers were ripped apart in simultaneous implosions, their debris scattering like shattered glass. A cheer erupted from somewhere on the bridge before being quickly swallowed by the gravity of the moment. Don't celebrate yet, Chen warned. We're still surrounded. The Rixens adapted quickly. Their remaining cruisers spread out, maintaining maximum distance, bombarding the Nemesis from every angle. A graviton beam lashed out from one of the lead ships, striking the destroyer's starboard flank. The Nemesis shuddered, caught in the beam's grip, locked in place for a critical second. Starboard thrusters offline. Ruiz shouted. Another 3 plasma volleys slammed into the shields. Warning klaxons blared as power levels dropped. Shields at 50%. Chen reported. Reroute auxiliary power from aft reactors, Ward said coldly. And break that graviton lock before they pin us down. Aye, Captain, overcharging ventral thrusters. The Nemesis kicked hard, engines flaring, wrenching itself free of the graviton beam with a violent twist. The crew lurched against their harnesses, several stations sparking dangerously. Ward never flinched. Bring us around. Put the lance on that ship and fire. The Ares lance discharged again, brighter and hotter this time, lancing across the void to strike the graviton-equipped cruiser. The beam tore through its hull like it was made of paper, snapping the ship in two. Enemy vessel destroyed. Mason confirmed. But the Rixens were relentless. A pair of heavy cruisers surged forward, their combined firepower hammering the Nemesis's forward shields until they collapsed in a burst of white light. For a fraction of a second, the destroyer's black hull was naked against the void. Forward shields offline. Chen shouted. Hull integrity at 90%, but we can't take another volley like that. Ward's voice dropped to a deadly calm. Then we don't let them get another volley. Bring us nose to nose with those cruisers. The bridge crew exchanged quick, startled glances, but obeyed. The Nemesis roared forward, closing the distance in seconds. At near point-blank range, her railguns fired full broadsides, slugs tearing through the enemy ships faster than their shields could cycle. One cruiser exploded in a violent plume of energy. The other tried to veer away, but the destroyer's missile bays opened, unleashing a spread of fusion-tipped warheads that tore it apart in a blinding flash. The blast rocked the Nemesis, rattling the bridge windows. Multiple enemy ships destroyed, Ruiz said, a note of triumph creeping into his voice. Ward didn't smile. His gaze stayed fixed on the tactical display. They're learning, he said softly. The last wave of cruisers regrouped into a tight spearhead formation, preparing for a final run. Every surviving Rixen ship locked weapons on the Nemesis. Chen looked up from her console, pale but resolute. They're committing everything, Captain. If we take this hit, we might not come back from it. Ward's eyes were like ice. Then we make sure they don't come back either. Mason, fire the lance on my mark. Helm, give me full acceleration straight through their formation. Straight through, sir? You heard me. The Nemesis surged forward, cutting across the void like a black spear. Plasma fire streaked past, some glancing off the flickering shields, some tearing glowing scars into the hull. The crew held their breath as the distance closed to just a few kilometers. Mark! The Ares lance fired one last time, slicing through the lead ship of the formation. The cruisers behind it were forced to break formation or be caught in the shockwave, and that single break was all the Nemesis needed. Railguns, missiles, and drones struck in perfect unison, tearing the formation apart from within. One by one, the last Rixen cruisers died, their wreckage scattering into the void. And then, at last, there was silence. The bridge was dim, lit only by the glow of damage control readouts and the distant stars. The crew sat frozen in their harnesses, listening to the faint hum of the reactor and their own breathing. Enemy fleet destroyed, Shin said finally, her voice quiet. No survivors detected. Ward exhaled slowly, letting the tension bleed from his shoulders. Damage report. Hull integrity at 72%. Forward shields offline, secondary emitters fried, but we're still combat capable, Ruiz said. The bridge fell silent again as the reality sank in. They had done the impossible. A single Earthship had annihilated an entire Rixen task force. Mason turned toward Ward, her voice trembling. Captain, we might have just changed history. Ward didn't answer. He stood at the viewport, staring out at the burning debris field. No, he said quietly. We've just started it. Silence fell over the battlefield. Where once there had been a wall of black Rixen cruisers, now there was only burning debris and drifting wreckage. Fragments of alien ships tumbled end over end, trailing glowing gas and metal shards like comets. The void was littered with the ghosts of what had been a fleet designed to intimidate, and it had been annihilated by a single Earthship. On the bridge of the Nemesis, the lights flickered as power systems stabilized. The smell of ozone still hung in the air, and faint smoke coiled from scorched conduits above. Crew members sat in silence, their eyes wide, the weight of what they had done finally settling in. Commander Rileychin broke the stillness, her voice measured but low. Enemy task force completely neutralized. No transmissions, no life signs, no escape pods detected. A heavy quiet followed. Even the steady hum of the reactor sounded loud. Captain Elias Ward stood near the center of the bridge, staring out through the reinforced viewport at the wreckage. His hands were clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. Lieutenant Harper Mason swallowed hard, her fingers still resting on the weapons controls. Sir, we actually did it. We took on the entire fleet. Ward nodded slowly, but there was no triumph in his face. We were forced to. They left us no choice. Shin glanced at him, reading the subtle weight in his voice. This wasn't just a battle, she said quietly. This was a declaration. Yes. Ward finally turned away from the viewport, his eyes sharp and cold. And we need to make sure they hear it. Open a channel, Ward ordered. His voice was calm but carried a gravity that made everyone in the room look up. Mason hesitated for only a fraction of a second before tapping her console. Channel open. All subspace frequencies broadcasting. Ward stepped into the center of the bridge, the wreckage of the Rixen fleet still visible behind him like a silent backdrop. This is Captain Elias Ward of the Earth Defense Force destroyer Nemesis, he said, his voice carrying the weight of humanity. To the Rixen conglomerate, and to any other empire listening, Earth will not bow. We will not submit. You have seen what a single human warship can do. If you come for us again, we will meet you with fire. He let the words hang in the air for a long moment before nodding. End transmission. Far across orbit, aboard the Rixen command station on RYX-4, a high marshal of the conglomerate stood motionless before a massive viewscreen. Around him, sub-commanders clicked their mandibles and murmured in disbelief, their iridescent carapaces shifting in agitation. The human warship had wiped out an entire task force. No reinforcements had even arrived in time to witness the battle. The High Marshal's four black eyes narrowed. For centuries, the Rixens had assumed their power unshakable, their supremacy unchallenged. They had conquered dozens of species without resistance worth remembering. But humanity was different. The Marshal turned slowly to his second-in-command. "They defied us, and destroyed us," he said, his tone dangerously calm. "No one has done that in 100 cycles." The commander's mandibles clicked uneasily. "Shall I summon the second fleet?" The Marshal looked back at the wreckage glowing on the screen. "No. Not yet. We must understand what we face." And for the first time in generations, the Rixon conglomerate felt something it had not felt in living memory. Fear. Back aboard the Nemesis, damage control crews worked in near silence, moving through the scarred hallways, repairing ruptured conduits and sealing microfractures in the hull. The ship bore the marks of the battle like scars, but it was still alive, still whole. Ward walked the length of the bridge, his boots echoing softly. He stopped beside Chen's station, where data readouts scrolled endlessly. "Status?" he asked. "Shields are regenerating, but forward emitters are offline until we get back to drydock," Chen said. "Hull integrity holding at 72%. Weapon systems at 60% capacity, but we can fire if needed." Ward nodded. "Good. Have engineering secure all power relays. I want to be ready in case they decide to send reinforcements." Chen hesitated before speaking again. "Captain, what if this escalates? What if this isn't the last time we face them?" Ward looked back toward the viewport, where the dying embers of the Rixon fleet still floated like funeral pyres. "It won't be the last," he said quietly. "They will come back. But when they do," he let the words trail off, as if considering the future. "When they do, they will think twice before underestimating humanity again." Down in the crew quarters, the atmosphere was subdued but electric. Technicians, gunners, and engineers sat together, some talking in hushed voices, others staring silently at the walls. Lieutenant Ruiz entered the compartment, helmet tucked under one arm, his face still smudged with smoke. "You should have seen it," he said to no one in particular. "That last cruiser, it didn't even have time to turn before the Lance ripped it in half. Cleanest shot I've ever seen." Across the room, an ensign whispered, "Do you think they'll retaliate?" Ruiz hesitated. "Yeah," he said finally. "But next time, we'll be ready. We showed them what we can do. That counts for something." The order to set course for Earth came an hour later. The Nemesis turned away from the battlefield, its engines flaring, leaving only silence and drifting wreckage behind. On the bridge, Ward gave the command. "Engage FTL." The stars stretched into brilliant lines as the destroyer slipped into hyperspace, vanishing like a ghost. For a moment, there was nothing left in RYX-4 orbit but fragments and shadows. When Earth received the transmission, the planet seemed to hold its breath. News outlets replayed the captain's words over and over again, "Earth will not bow." Across the globe, people watched the footage, the lone black destroyer standing against a fleet, and for the first time since the alien transmission had arrived, humanity felt something fierce and unyielding ignite inside them. Not fear. Pride. On the bridge of the Nemesis, Captain Elias Ward stood alone by the viewport, the stars blazing outside. Commander Chen approached quietly. "Sir, message from the President. She says the entire planet is behind us. She also says, good work." Ward allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "It wasn't just good work," he said softly. "It was a warning." He looked out at the stars, his reflection staring back at him from the glass, calm, resolute, unshaken. The Nemesis surged through hyperspace, its black silhouette cutting across the endless sea of stars, a lone sentinel carrying a single truth back to Earth. Humanity had spoken. And the galaxy would never forget.